Okay, the world is complicated, and that can be received as a gift for us all to grow and discover new skills as we move through life. It can also be overwhelming. You just did a video on parliamentary procedure, which for many people feels really, really complicated. And here is information about other ways to make decisions, which seem to me, in the light of the cultural shifts, generational shifts, how complicated it is, all the things that we're working on, that we as moderators and leaders need a lot of facility in, not just Robert's rules, but other ways to make decisions broadly under the category of spiritual discernment. So our Book of Order says that meetings of council shall be open and closed with prayer. They need to be conducted in accordance with Robert's rules newly revised, except with the contradiction of this Constitution. So that's the last video. But it also says councils may also make use of processes of discernment in their deliberations prior to a vote as agreed upon by the body. So the body agrees to engage in some other processes, then go ahead and do that. That sentence is an addition to the Book of Order as we moved into the newer form of government, and a recognition officially that while we wanted to have a completely agreed upon process for making decisions, where we could take a vote, where people could look at it and feel safe in that environment, we also need to engage in other ways of working together. To me, it's a way of saying, praying, using Robert's rules, and then praying does not make necessarily a meeting Christian. It doesn't actually necessarily engage God. We need to think more broadly about that. Some history of this is that there was a theological task force on the peace, unity, and purity of the church, which was begun in the late 90s, really around issues of human sexuality and ordination, but also recognizing that there were and are deeper and other issues at play. And what they said is there is often considerable contentious disagreement. And when there is, in their language, considerable contentious disagreement, that Robert's Rules is probably not the best environment to initially engage something. And I would say, they say, but I want to say too, it's not that they were, in my estimation, correct, and recognizing that this, while those conversations and the considerable contentious disagreement have been around marriage and human sexuality, I have seen these conversations around membership, around finances, around the direction of a church, and figuring out ways that we work together well is a critical skill for adaptive environments. Gray and Tucker put it this way: much of the work of the session is involved in leading the church in mission. It is a complex and often difficult responsibility, careful discernment, much prayer, as well as efficient planning, administration, and evaluation. That the what can be overwhelming, but can be really interesting, amount of choices that a session has, that pastors have, about what to do, how to engage in the need of the world, how the gospel comes to bear in our present cultural context, is complex and can be difficult. Robert's Rules tends to commit people early on to positions and ask them to think in an either-or sense. So what happens is someone will say, I move that we do this, and that's the way Robert's Rules work. You have to have an idea, specific proposal before that, and then people need to say, I think that's a good idea, I think that's a bad idea. So I move we hire a director of Christian education, and then you are immediately into this position. Yes, we do it. No, we don't do it. And it becomes very difficult to just open up the whole conversation and have somebody say, well, can we think about the whole staffing model? And how do we get at what is necessary for any of our staff to do in this environment? So you're not generating possibilities when you're committing yourself early on. And so lots of work's been done saying, well, what are other possibilities in terms of decision making? Hotchkiss adds in his writing that Robert's Rules offered a shared basis for civic and charitable participation in a time of concentrating wealth and growing cultural diversity. So he said, well, General Robert thinking, well, how are we going to work together when when you got all this concentrating wealth and people get anxious about that, and you got growing cultural diversity, people don't share a way that they work together. And he says we've raised similar challenges, raised to a new level. And I would say part of that raise to a new level has to do with the depth and breadth of cultural diversity. So when people come from backgrounds that aren't the same European backgrounds that feel comfortable in places like Robert's Rules, it can feel culturally alien to them and not at all native in terms of how they work together. He suggests before emotion, hunting for common ground, moving towards what he calls clusters of opinions or clusters of opinion. And I think he really helpfully says give it space. I have colleagues who don't make decisions right away. So a session sits with something for a month before they make a decision so that people have space to think about stuff. And he says that Robert's Rules can be helpful in terms of framing that a time for discussion is over, we're moving towards a decision. He is an advocate that eventually you need to decide. But he wants to figure out ways to create space that people can talk before they're committed to positions. Vicki Curtis, who's done a lot of work, Presbyterian minister, done a lot of work about this, says that what she proposes is similar to acting as a committee of a whole. You can see that in Robert's Rules, section 52. She says parliamentary procedure is okay for dealing with routine organizational matters, and she wants to use what she calls communal discernment when dealing with significant matters that affect the whole community. I'm uncomfortable with putting Robert's Rules in a box that says, gosh, it's only good for routine organizational matters. Robert's Rules can be very helpful in terms of containing and focusing debate when there is considerable contentious disagreement and you're making a binary choice and you want to say, well, here's how we're going to have this conversation. I think that this communal discernment can be helpful when we're dealing with opaque matters that need discussion to crystallize before you move towards a decision. There's lots of models, which can be a weakness, but I think we need to be open to something new emerging. Vicki Curtis says you establish a common starting point, you gather and share information, you explore options, you choose a direction, you rest with the decision. And she's got a model there where you have people raise numbers and move towards what we're looking for is what we call consensus. With consensus, always a question of whether we're talking about unanimity or is the result everybody's first choice, or does it mean I've been heard, I can support the final decision? Like a lot of these models, there needs to be conversation about the process and agreed upon process before you move through the process towards an outcome, because people get tripped up when they don't understand what they're doing. And so if you, hey, we're aiming for consensus, and one says, oh great, we're gonna work on this till we're unanimous and everybody agrees, and what you really mean is everyone's at about 90%. So lots of work to do in terms of how this works with a session or a larger body. I think some cautions with this kind of communal discernment are the presence of hidden agendas that aren't on the table. There can be a pressure on a minority to agree, create consensus, rather than say, no, I don't agree with this, I'm voting against it, and we're moving forward, and then I can say, I was heard, but I voted against it. The process can lack clarity, and any opaque process gives power to people who are in charge of the process. I think these work best in systems of trust where people can pause and talk about things in the middle of things. Some of the options that get named are things like appreciative inquiry, World Cafe, Vicki Curtis's model of communal discernment. Getting to Yes is a highly respected book by the Harvard Negotiation Project that has helped move things in broader directions. Hope that helps. Lots to learn here, and ongoing learning for all of us.